year of our Lord 1848, when the Carolina Low Country still whispered of old magic and older secrets, there stood a house that time itself seemed to avoid. Pendergast Manor rose from the marshlands like a specter, its white columns gleaming in the moonlight, its windows dark as pitch. The Spanish moss that hung from the surrounding oak trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if the very air around the property was hesitant to disturb whatever slept within. The name Pendergast had once commanded respect throughout Charleston society. Their wealth, built upon sprawling cotton plantations and shrewd investments in shipping ventures, had positioned them among the elite families of South Carolina. But wealth, as the old adage warns, seldom brings contentment, and the Pendergasts, for all their material abundance, harbored a darkness that no amount of silver or fine china could dispel. Our story begins not with the master of the house, Thaddeus Pendergast, nor with his wife, Eleanor, but with a humble serving girl named Abigail. At just 17 years of age, Abigail had spent nearly half her life in service to the Pendergast household. Her mother before her had been a cook in the kitchen, and when consumption had taken her 5 winters prior, Abigail had assumed her duties with the quiet resignation of one who knows no other path in life. It was Abigail who first noticed the strange crystalline formations in the master's study, small, tear-shaped droplets that caught the candlelight like diamonds. They appeared after particularly heated arguments between Thaddeus and Eleanor, seemingly materializing from nowhere, clinging to the underside of the oak desk or nestled in the folds of the velvet drapes. "Begging your pardon, sir," Abigail had said one morning as she swept the hearth, "but I keep finding these glass beads about the room." She held up one of the tear-shaped crystals, which sparkled even in the dim morning light that filtered through the heavy curtains. Thaddeus Pendergast, a man of 45 years, with a severe countenance perpetually creased with worry, had snatched the crystal from her palm with such haste that Abigail had nearly toppled backward into the cold ashes of last night's fire. "You are not to speak of these," he'd hissed, his gray eyes narrowing beneath thick brows. "You are not to touch them. You are not to mention them to anyone, least of all to Mrs. Pendergast. Do I make myself abundantly clear?" Abigail had nodded, dropping her gaze to the floor as was expected of one in her station. But curiosity, once kindled, is not easily extinguished, and so began her silent observation of the peculiar habits and mounting tensions within Pendergast Manor. The family consisted of 5 members, Thaddeus and Eleanor, their twin daughters Lucinda and Cecilia, both 15, and possessing their mother's ethereal beauty, and their son, Elias, a boy of 10 years with a disposition as sour as unripe persimmons. The household staff was modest by the standards of such wealthy families: a cook, 2 maids, including Abigail, a groundskeeper, and a coachman. There had once been more, but in recent years Thaddeus had dismissed several servants without explanation. Eleanor Pendergast was a mystery unto herself. Born to a respectable Charleston family, she had been considered a great beauty in her youth. Even now, at 38, she retained a delicate loveliness, though it was increasingly obscured by a perpetual melancholy. She rarely left her chambers before noon, and when she did emerge, her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she were walking through water. Her eyes, a striking shade of amber that her daughters had inherited, often appeared unfocused, gazing at something beyond the visible world. It was commonly whispered among the staff that Mrs. Pendergast suffered from nervous exhaustion, that fashionable affliction of genteel ladies. Abigail, however, suspected something more sinister lay at the heart of Eleanor's condition, a suspicion that grew stronger with each passing day. The twins, Lucinda and Cecilia, were identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. Lucinda was vivacious and willful, prone to fits of laughter that echoed through the somber halls of Pendergast Manor like errant spirits. Cecilia was contemplative and reserved, often found in the library with her nose buried in leather-bound volumes of poetry or natural philosophy. Both girls were educated far beyond what was common for young ladies of their era, at their father's insistence. Thaddeus may have been a harsh and distant parent, but he believed firmly in the power of education, even for his daughters. Young Elias, the heir to the Pendergast fortune, was a sullen child who delighted in tormenting the house staff and mutilating small creatures he found in the garden. Abigail had once discovered him in the kitchen, methodically removing the legs from a live cricket, watching with clinical detachment as the insect struggled. When he'd noticed her presence, he'd simply smiled, a cold, emotionless curving of the lips that had sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm conducting an experiment," he'd explained, his voice high and clear as a bell. "Father says a man of science must observe all aspects of life and death." Thaddeus indeed encouraged his son's scientific pursuits, providing him with microscopes, dissection kits, and volumes on anatomy that seemed ill-suited for a child his age. The master of the house took great pride in Elias's precocious intellect, often boasting to visitors about the boy's advanced understanding of subjects that would confound men twice his age. But there were no visitors to Pendergast Manor anymore. Not since the incident at last year's Harvest Ball. The Pendergast Harvest Ball had once been the highlight of the autumn social season, drawing families from as far as Savannah and Charleston to the Grand Estate. The previous year's event had begun like any other, the ballroom aglow with hundreds of candles, musicians playing quadrilles and waltzes, ladies in their finest silks, and gentlemen in impeccable evening wear. Eleanor, resplendent in a gown of deep burgundy velvet, had been unusually animated that evening, moving from group to group with a grace that reminded everyone of the vivacious debutante she had once been. Thaddeus had watched her with a mixture of pride and something darker, something that resembled fear. The evening had progressed pleasantly until midnight approached. As tradition dictated, the guests had gathered in the grand hall for the toast. Thaddeus had just raised his glass when Eleanor, standing at his side, had begun to weep. Not the delicate, ladylike tears deemed acceptable in society, but great, heaving sobs that bent her double. And then, to the horror of all present, the tears that fell from her eyes had hardened before they hit the floor, transforming into small, perfect crystals that clinked against the marble tiles like tiny bells. The guests had fallen silent, staring in disbelief. Thaddeus had quickly escorted his wife from the room, and the twins had hurriedly directed the musicians to resume playing. But the damage was done. By morning, rumors of witchcraft and demonic possession were spreading throughout the county like wildfire. No invitations had arrived at Pendergast Manor since. The family had retreated further into isolation, and the strange crystalline tears had become more abundant. Now, nearly a year after that fateful evening, Abigail found herself increasingly drawn into the web of secrets that enshrouded the family. Her duties took her to every corner of the house, and she used these opportunities to observe and listen. She noted how Thaddeus spent long hours locked in his study, poring over ancient texts with crumbling leather bindings. She saw how Eleanor would sit at her vanity, brushing her long auburn hair exactly 100 times each evening, murmuring something that sounded like an incantation with each stroke. She witnessed how the twins would sometimes stand motionless in the garden at dusk, their hands linked, their lips moving in silent unison as they stared at the setting sun. Most disturbing of all was Elias, who had taken to collecting the crystalline tears in a small silver box that he kept beneath his bed. Abigail had discovered this while changing his linens, and the boy had caught her looking. Instead of anger, his face had shown only smug satisfaction. "They're getting bigger," he'd said, opening the box to reveal dozens of the tears, some as large as robin's eggs. "Mother cries more now. Father says it's because she's weak, but I think it's because of what's growing inside her." Abigail had felt a chill at his words. "What do you mean, Master Elias? What's growing inside your mother?" The boy had shrugged, closing the box with a snap. "The glass heart, of course. Everyone in our family grows one eventually. Father's is almost complete. That's why he never cries anymore." Before Abigail could question him further, Elias had been called away for his lessons. She had been left standing in his chamber, trying to make sense of his cryptic words. A glass heart? It sounded like the fanciful imaginings of a disturbed child. And yet, there was undeniably something wrong with Eleanor Pendergast. The mistress of the house had grown increasingly frail over the past months. Her skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, and she moved with a stiffness that suggested physical pain. The local physician, Dr. Hammond, had been summoned several times, but his treatments, primarily laudanum and rest, seemed to provide little relief. Abigail's curiosity might have remained just that, an idle interest in the peculiarities of her employers, had it not been for the events that unfolded on a stormy night in early October. The rain had been relentless since dusk, pounding against the windows with such force that it seemed intent on breaking through the glass. Thunder rolled across the low country in waves, and lightning transformed the night into brief, blinding moments of day. Abigail had been instructed to bring a tray of evening tea to Eleanor's chamber. balancing the silver service carefully as she navigated the dimly lit corridor. She had paused outside the mistress's door upon hearing raised voices from within. "You must control yourself, Eleanor." Thaddeus's voice, though quiet, carried an edge sharper than any knife. "Your condition worsens with each display of emotion. Do you wish to end up like your mother?" "Perhaps I do." Eleanor's response was punctuated by what sounded like a shattering teacup. "Perhaps that would be preferable to this half-life, this slow crystallization. To feel nothing, Thaddeus. Do you know what that's like? To look at your own children and feel nothing but a cold weight in your chest? You knew what it meant to marry into this family. The Pendergast legacy. The Pendergast curse, you mean. You never told me it would be like this. You never warned me that one day I would lose the ability to love my own children, that my tears would turn to glass and my heart to stone. Not stone, Eleanor. Glass. Pure, perfect glass. The culmination of our family's gift." "Gift? You call this a gift?" Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "I can scarcely breathe sometimes. I feel it growing inside me, spreading through my veins like ice. And the children. Lucinda has already begun to show signs. I found crystalline tears on her pillow last week." There was a heavy silence before Thaddeus spoke again, his voice softer now. "It manifests earlier in each generation. My father was 50 before his first glass tear. I was 30. Lucinda is only 15. And Elias?" Eleanor whispered. "He doesn't cry at all. Not when he broke his arm last spring. Not when his pet sparrow died. Not even when you took the strap to him for disobedience. He feels nothing, Thaddeus. He is already lost to us. No, he is the purest expression of our lineage. He will never know the weakness of human sentiment. He will never be ruled by his passions as lesser men are. He will be perfect. He will be a monster," Eleanor hissed, "as you are becoming. As I fear I am becoming too." The conversation was interrupted by a particularly violent thunderclap that shook the very foundations of the house. Abigail, fearing discovery, had hastily knocked on the door. The voices inside fell silent immediately. "Enter," called Thaddeus after a moment. Abigail had stepped into the room, keeping her eyes lowered as she set the tea tray on the nearest table. Eleanor sat rigid in a high-backed chair by the window, her face averted, while Thaddeus stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel. "That will be all, Abigail," he'd said dismissively. She had curtsied and turned to leave, but not before noticing something glittering on the carpet near Eleanor's feet. More of the crystalline tears, these ones larger than any she'd seen before, and tinged with an unsettling reddish hue. That night, unable to sleep, Abigail had made a fateful decision. She would investigate the mystery of the Pendergast family and their crystalline tears. If something unnatural was occurring within the household, perhaps she could find help for Eleanor, whom she had always pitied, despite the woman's cold demeanor. The Manor's library became her sanctuary in the pre-dawn hours when the rest of the household still slumbered. Hidden behind rows of legal ledgers and agricultural almanacs, she discovered volumes of a different nature, books on alchemy, esoteric philosophy, and arcane rituals. Many were written in languages she couldn't decipher, their pages illustrated with strange symbols and disturbing anatomical drawings that seemed to blend human and crystalline forms. One slim volume, bound in faded green leather, was written in English. Its title, embossed in flaking gold leaf, read simply, "The Vitreous Transformation, a Study of the Pendergast Phenomenon." The author was listed as Dr. Marcus Pendergast, dated 1783. By the light of a single candle, careful not to drip wax on the aged pages, Abigail read the account of what appeared to be Thaddeus's great-grandfather. The journal documented his observations of a peculiar condition that afflicted his family line, beginning with his own father, Jeremiah Pendergast. According to the journal, Jeremiah had been a notorious privateer whose ship had ventured far beyond the established trade routes. On one such voyage, he had discovered an uncharted island in the Caribbean, where the natives worshipped strange crystalline formations that emerged from a cave deep in the island's interior. The locals believed these formations were the solidified emotions of their ancestors, preserved for eternity in glass. Fascinated by this concept, Jeremiah had spent months living among the islanders, learning their rituals and beliefs. He had eventually returned to South Carolina with a gift from the island's shaman, a small, heart-shaped crystal that pulsed with an inner light. The journal detailed how, after drinking a concoction containing ground particles of this crystal, Jeremiah had begun to change. His emotions became muted, His tears crystallized when they fell, and gradually, over many years, his actual heart had transformed into glass. Upon his death at the age of 72, his son Marcus had performed an autopsy and discovered a perfect glass heart within his father's chest cavity, a heart that continued to pulse with a faint light for 3 days after death. Convinced of the scientific importance of this phenomenon, Marcus had administered the same crystalline solution to himself and his children, thus ensuring the continuation of what he termed the vitreous evolution of the human form. The journal ended with a chilling prediction. In generations hence, a Pendergast will be born who requires no transformation, a child whose heart is glass from birth. This child will be the culmination of our family's journey toward perfection, a being free from the tyranny of human emotion, possessing clarity of thought and purpose unmatched by ordinary men. Through this child, the Pendergast legacy will achieve immortality. Abigail had closed the book with trembling hands, her mind reeling from the implications. Could this be true? Were the Pendergasts deliberately transforming themselves into something not quite human? And was young Elias the prophesied child, born with a heart of glass? The following days had brought subtle changes to the household routine. Lucinda began taking her meals in her room, and when Abigail brought her trays, she noticed the girl's eyes were perpetually red-rimmed, though no tears fell. Cecilia spent more time than ever in the library, poring over the same arcane texts that Abigail had discovered. Thaddeus locked himself in his study for days at a time, emerging only for brief, tense family dinners where barely a word was spoken. Most concerning was Eleanor's rapid deterioration. The mistress of the house now moved as if her joints were fused, her once fluid grace replaced by mechanical gestures. Her voice, when she spoke at all, had taken on a crystalline quality, like the delicate ring of fine glass being tapped, and the red-tinged tears continued to fall, though less frequently, each one larger and more perfectly formed than the last. It was during this tense period that Abigail began to notice she was being watched. She would turn from her duties to find Elias standing silently in a doorway, his unblinking gaze fixed upon her, or she would glimpse one of the twins following her through the garden as she hung laundry, ducking behind trees when she turned to look. Even Thaddeus, normally indifferent to the activities of servants, had begun to observe her with narrowed eyes whenever their paths crossed. Only Eleanor seemed oblivious to her presence, lost in a world of her own increasing isolation and pain. The situation came to a head one evening in late October, when the first frost had descended upon the low country, painting the marshlands with a silvery sheen. Abigail had been sent to the root cellar to fetch preserved vegetables for the next day's stew. The cellar was accessed through a heavy trapdoor in the kitchen floor, leading down a steep set of wooden stairs into the cool darkness below. As she'd descended, lantern in hand, she'd heard a strange sound emanating from the farthest corner of the cellar, a soft, rhythmic chiming, like dozens of tiny glass bells stirred by an unfelt breeze. Raising her lantern higher, she'd moved cautiously toward the sound. The light had fallen upon a sight that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Suspended from the ceiling beams by thin wires were hundreds of crystalline tears, arranged in concentric circles. They varied in size from tiny droplets to specimens as large as hen's eggs, and they ranged in color from clear to pale blue to the disturbing blood red of Eleanor's recent tears. In the center of this bizarre mobile hung a larger crystal, roughly the size and shape of a human heart. Unlike the others, this central crystal pulsed with a faint inner light, a steady, rhythmic glow that mimicked the beating of a heart. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice had come from directly behind her, causing Abigail to whirl around, nearly dropping her lantern. Thaddeus Pendergast stood at the foot of the stairs, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the kitchen above. He wore a dressing gown of burgundy brocade, and his hair, usually meticulously combed, hung loose about his shoulders, giving him a wild, almost feral appearance. "I see you've discovered our family's collection," he'd continued, stepping closer. In the lantern light, his eyes appeared unnaturally bright, reflecting the flame like polished glass. Each tear represents a moment of weakness overcome, an emotion transcended. Together they form a record of our family's progress toward perfection. Abigail had backed away, her shoulder blades pressing against the cold stone wall of the cellar. "Sir, I was only fetching vegetables for cook. I didn't mean to." "Don't dissemble, girl. I know you've been prying into matters that don't concern you. The books in the library have been disturbed, pages turned, bookmarks moved." His voice remained eerily calm. You know about the vitreous transformation. It wasn't a question, so Abigail didn't answer. Her gaze darted toward the stairs, calculating her chances of slipping past him and escaping to the kitchen above. Thaddeus seemed to read her thoughts. There's nowhere to run, Abigail. And really, there's no need. I'm not angry. In fact, I'm rather impressed by your curiosity and intelligence. Qualities I value highly. Qualities that would serve the Pendergast legacy well. Something in his tone sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cellar's cool air. Sir, my wife is failing, he said matter-of-factly. The transformation is nearly complete, but her constitution was too weak. She resisted the process for too long, allowed emotion to rule her even as her heart crystallized. The result is imperfect. She will not survive to see Christmas, I fear. Abigail felt sick. Mr. Pendergast, perhaps if you called for Dr. Hammond. His laugh cut her off, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed among the hanging crystals, causing them to chime discordantly. No physician can help Eleanor now. Her fate was sealed the day she accepted my hand in marriage, as was the fate of any woman who becomes mistress of Pendergast Manor. He stepped closer, and Abigail became acutely aware of how isolated they were, how easily her screams could be muffled by the thick stone walls surrounding them. I will need a new wife when Eleanor passes, Thaddeus continued, his gaze traveling slowly over Abigail's face and form. Someone young, strong, resilient. Someone who already understands the nature of our family's uniqueness. Someone like you, Abigail. Horror rose in her throat like bile. Sir, I'm just a serving girl. I'm not suitable to... Suitable? His eyebrows rose. What an odd concern coming from a girl who reads forbidden texts by candlelight and spies on her employers. No, Abigail, I think you are perfectly suited to the role I envision for you. You possess qualities that Eleanor, for all her social graces, lacked. Curiosity, adaptability, and most importantly, a natural immunity to the vitreous transformation. This last statement caught her off guard. Immunity? I don't understand. Haven't you wondered why I've kept you in my household all these years? Why I retained you after your mother's death, when by all rights you should have been sent to the orphanage or apprenticed elsewhere? Thaddeus reached out a pale hand and brushed a strand of hair from Abigail's face, his touch cold as marble. You're special, Abigail. You carry a rare bloodline, one that can withstand the effects of the crystal without succumbing to its transformative properties. His fingers trailed down to her throat, resting lightly on her pulse point. Your heart will remain flesh and blood, even as you bear children whose hearts are glass. You are the perfect vessel for the next generation of Pendergasts. Abigail swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. And if I refuse? His smile never reached his eyes. I'm afraid that's not an option. The future of my family line depends on finding a suitable mother for Elias's children. Yes, Abigail, it is my son who will continue our lineage through you. He is the culmination of our family's journey, the child born with a glass heart, and you will be the mother of his children, who will be even more perfect than he. The implications of his words sent waves of revulsion through her. Elias was just a boy of 10, but in a few years. This is madness, she whispered. You can't force me to marry your son. People would know something was wrong. Questions would be asked. By whom? We are isolated here, our connections to society severed after Eleanor's display last year. Besides, such unions are not unheard of among the plantation families, particularly when bloodlines and inheritance are at stake. No, Abigail, there will be no interference from outside. Your fate is sealed. As if to emphasize his point, he reached up and plucked one of the smaller crystals from its wire. Holding it between thumb and forefinger, he pressed it against Abigail's cheek, just below her eye. The crystal was cold at first, then burned like ice against her skin. This was my first tear, Thaddeus murmured, shed when I was 30 years old, upon learning of my father's death, the last genuine emotion I ever experienced. I keep it as a reminder of what I've transcended. His eyes, inches from hers now, reflected her terrified face like mirrors. Soon, very soon, you will become acquainted with our family's legacy in the most intimate way imaginable. Until then, you will continue your duties as before. But know that you are being watched, Abigail. Any attempt to flee or to speak of what you've learned will be severely punished. With that, he had stepped back, gesturing toward the stairs. Now, I believe Cook is waiting for those vegetables. Do not disappoint her, or me. Abigail had gathered what she'd come for with trembling hands and ascended the stairs, feeling Thaddeus's gaze burning into her back with every step. In the kitchen, Cook had grumbled about her taking so long, but Abigail barely heard her. Her mind was racing, searching desperately for a way to escape the fate Thaddeus had decreed for her. That night, she'd lain awake in her small attic room, listening to the old house creak and settle around her. The other maid, Mary, slept soundly in the adjacent bed, untroubled by knowledge of crystalline hearts and monstrous transformations. Abigail envied her that ignorance. As the moon rose higher, casting long shadows through the small window, Abigail had reached a decision. She would flee Pendergast Manor tonight, while the household slept. She had little money saved, but perhaps enough for passage to Charleston, where she had a cousin who worked at the docks. From there, she could stow away on a ship bound for the north, where she might lose herself in a city like New York or Boston. But even as she'd formed this plan, a soft chiming had reached her ears, the same sound she'd heard in the cellar. It seemed to be coming from the corridor outside her door. Heart pounding, she'd slipped from her bed and pressed her eye to the keyhole. The hallway beyond was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, but it was enough to reveal a figure standing motionless outside her door. Elias Pendergast, still as a statue in his nightshirt, clutching his silver box of crystalline tears. His eyes, reflecting the lamplight, appeared to glow from within, and his childish face wore an expression of such cold calculation that Abigail had recoiled from the keyhole as if struck. Thaddeus's warning echoed in her mind. "You are being watched." There would be no escape tonight, perhaps no escape ever. The days that followed had taken on a dreamlike quality for Abigail, a waking nightmare from which she could not rouse herself. She'd performed her duties mechanically, constantly aware of eyes following her movements. Elias from doorways, Thaddeus from behind his newspaper at breakfast, the twins from the garden where they now spent hours regardless of the increasingly chill weather. Only Eleanor seemed oblivious to the tense surveillance, her condition deteriorating so rapidly that she now spent most days confined to her bed. When Abigail brought her meals, the mistress of the house often didn't acknowledge her presence at all, staring instead at the ceiling with glass-like eyes that reflected the room in perfect detail. On rare occasions, Eleanor would speak, not to Abigail directly, but as if communing with someone invisible. Her voice on these occasions had a strange, resonant quality that filled the room like the ring of crystal stemware. "I can see through time," she'd whispered one afternoon as Abigail adjusted her pillows. "Past and future, all at once. The island where it began. The shaman with his obsidian knife, the heart crystal pulsing in his palm, Jeremiah drinking the potion, feeling the first hardening in his chest, and the future. Oh, the future is cold and bright and endless. Glass hearts beating in glass bodies, spreading across the world like a plague of perfect stillness." Abigail had pretended not to hear, but Eleanor's skeletal hand had shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "You must break the cycle," she'd hissed, her amber eyes suddenly focusing with shocking clarity. "Break the heart crystal. It's the source, the original sin of our family. Break it and we all shatter." Before Abigail could respond, the bedroom door had opened to reveal Thaddeus, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Leave us," he'd commanded, and Abigail had fled, Eleanor's words burning in her mind. The heart crystal, the source, the one hanging in the center of the cellar's strange mobile, pulsing with its own inner light. Could it truly be the origin of the Pendergast curse? And if she destroyed it, would the family's unnatural transformation be halted? It seemed a fanciful notion, yet Abigail found herself drawn to the possibility like a moth to flame. If nothing else, it offered hope where before there had been none. That evening at dinner, an unusual announcement was made. Thaddeus, standing at the head of the table where the family took their meals in the small breakfast room, the formal dining room having gone unused since the disastrous harvest ball, declared that they would be hosting guests the following night. "The Reverend Blackwood and his wife will be joining us for dinner," he'd stated, his tone brooking no argument. "It has been too long since this house entertained company, and rumors have begun to circulate about our reclusiveness. It would be prudent to dispel such talk with a show of ordinary hospitality." The twins had exchanged surprised glances, while Elias had merely continued methodically dissecting his roast duck, separating meat from bone with surgical precision. "Will Mother be joining us?" Cecilia had asked softly, her eyes darting toward the ceiling, above which Eleanor's bedroom lay. "Your mother is indisposed," Thaddeus had replied sharply, "as she has been for some time." The Reverend and Mrs. Blackwood are aware of her delicate condition and will not expect her presence. You girls will serve as hostesses. I trust you remember your lessons in etiquette." The twins had nodded in unison, though Lucinda's expression had been mutinous. Abigail, serving the vegetables, had noticed a telltale shimmer in the corner of the girl's eye, the beginning of a crystalline tear that she quickly blinked away. "Abigail," Thaddeus had continued, his gaze fixing on her with uncomfortable intensity, "you will serve at table tomorrow night. Wear your best dress and ensure your appearance is beyond reproach. The Reverend Blackwood is influential in this county, and I wish him to see that Pendergast Manor remains a house of refinement and order." She'd curtsied in acknowledgement, her mind already racing ahead. The dinner would occupy the family's attention completely. If ever there was to be an opportunity to access the cellar unobserved, it would be then. The following day had passed in a flurry of preparation. The formal dining room was opened, aired, and cleaned. The silver was polished to a mirror shine. The best china and crystal were brought out and washed. Cook labored over an elaborate menu of local delicacies: she crab soup, roast duck with orange glaze, sweet potato souffle, and a charlotte russe for dessert. The twins were fitted for dinner gowns they hadn't worn in over a year, and even Elias was subjected to a haircut and the indignity of a starched collar. Thaddeus oversaw all with a nervous energy that was uncharacteristic of him. He seemed to vibrate with tension, snapping at the smallest imperfection in the preparations. More than once Abigail caught him staring at the crystal decanter set out for after-dinner brandy, rubbing his thumb across the cut patterns as if communing with the glass itself. As dusk approached, the household assembled in the drawing room to await their guests. The twins, dressed identically in gowns of pale blue silk, sat stiffly on the edge of a settee. Elias stood by the window, watching the driveway with apparent indifference. Thaddeus paced before the hearth, checking his pocket watch every few minutes. The Reverend and Mrs. Blackwood arrived precisely at 7, their carriage crunching up the gravel drive just as the long-case clock in the hall began to chime the hour. Abigail, stationed in the dining room to ensure all was in readiness, heard the front door open, followed by the murmur of greetings and the rustle of Mrs. Blackwood's skirts as she was ushered into the drawing room. The Reverend was a tall, austere man, with the weathered countenance of one who has spent many hours contemplating the divine. His wife was a small, bird-like woman whose quick eyes missed nothing as she was escorted through the house to the dining room. Abigail noted how those eyes lingered on the crystal teardrops that had been incorporated into the chandelier above the dining table, a recent addition that she'd never noticed before. The dinner proceeded with excruciating formality. Thaddeus, at the head of the table, maintained a stream of conversation about local politics, the cotton market, and the new church being built in town. The Reverend responded in kind, while Mrs. Blackwood attempted to draw the twins into discussion of the upcoming Christmas festivities. Elias ate in silence, his table manners impeccable, his gaze occasionally flicking to Abigail as she moved around the table serving dishes and refilling glasses. It was during the main course that the first sign of trouble appeared. Lucinda, who had been picking at her food more than eating it, suddenly gasped and pressed a hand to her eye. "Excuse me," she murmured, rising so quickly that her chair nearly toppled backward. "I feel suddenly unwell. Please continue without me." Before anyone could respond, she had fled the dining room, her skirts rustling as she took the stairs two at a time. There was a moment of uncomfortable silence before Thaddeus smoothly redirected the conversation, attributing his daughter's abrupt departure to the delicate constitution she's inherited from her mother. Mrs. Blackwood had looked skeptical but said nothing. The Reverend, however, fixed Thaddeus with a penetrating stare. "Speaking of Mrs. Pendergast," he'd said, setting down his fork deliberately, "I must express my concern, Thaddeus. It has been nearly a year since Eleanor has been seen in town or at church. The congregation misses her presence, and there has been talk." Thaddeus's knuckles had whitened around his wineglass. "As I've explained in my letters, Reverend, my wife suffers from a rare nervous condition that makes public appearances impossible at present. She is under the care of physicians from Charleston who assure me that with time and rest, she will recover." The Reverend nodded slowly. "I understand, of course, but perhaps a visit from her pastor might bring comfort in her isolation. I could come tomorrow afternoon." "That won't be necessary," Thaddeus interrupted, his tone sharper than was polite. "Eleanor's physicians have prescribed absolute quiet. No visitors. I'm sure you understand." An uncomfortable silence had fallen over the table. Cecilia stared at her plate, her face unreadable. Elias continued to eat as if nothing untoward had occurred, and Abigail, circling the table with the wine decanter, felt Mrs. Blackwood's shrewd gaze following her movements. "Tell me, Mr. Pendergast," the woman had said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension, "where did you acquire those fascinating crystal teardrops in your chandelier? I've never seen anything quite like them." Thaddeus's smile had been rigid. "A family heirloom, Mrs. Blackwood, passed down through generations of Pendergasts. They are rather unique, aren't they?" "Indeed, almost as if they were formed from actual tears, frozen in time." Her gaze had sharpened. "Reminds me of a story my grandmother used to tell, about a witch whose tears turned to diamonds when she wept for her lost soul." "A charming folk tale," Thaddeus had replied, his voice glacial. "But I assure you, our family treasures have a far more mundane origin." The remainder of the dinner had progressed with strained politeness. Dessert was served and consumed in relative silence. When the time came for the men to retire for brandy and cigars, Mrs. Blackwood had declined Cecilia's invitation to take tea in the drawing room, citing a sudden headache and a desire to return home. Within an hour of their arrival, the Blackwoods were departing, their goodbyes cool but correct. As their carriage disappeared down the drive, Thaddeus had turned to his remaining children and Abigail, his face a thundercloud of suppressed rage. "Well," he'd said, his voice deceptively calm, "that was an unmitigated disaster. Cecilia, see to your sister. Elias, to your room. And you, Abigail." His gaze had pinned her like an insect to a board. "Clear the dining room and then report to my study. We have matters to discuss." The family had dispersed, leaving Abigail to clear away the remains of the failed dinner party. Her hands trembled as she stacked plates and gathered silverware. Thaddeus's summons to his study could mean only one thing. He intended to accelerate his plans for her. Perhaps the Blackwoods' obvious suspicions had forced his hand, or perhaps Lucinda's public display of her condition had convinced him that time was running short. Either way, Abigail knew she could not face him alone in his study. If she went, she would never leave Pendergast Manor alive, at least not as herself. She would become another Eleanor, slowly crystallizing from the inside out, a vessel for monstrous children with hearts of glass. No, she decided, as she carried the last of the dishes to the kitchen. The time for caution was past. She would act tonight. While the household was distracted by the aftermath of the disastrous dinner party, she would access the cellar and destroy the heart crystal that Eleanor had identified as the source of the family's curse. Cook had already retired for the night, leaving the kitchen deserted. Abigail set down her tray of dishes and moved to the trapdoor that led to the root cellar. It was heavy, designed to be lifted by a man's strength rather than a girl's, but fear and desperation lent her power she didn't know she possessed. The door swung upward with a groan of hinges that seemed deafening in the quiet kitchen. For a moment she hesitated. What if Eleanor's words had been merely the ravings of a mind unhinged by pain and transformation? What if destroying the heart crystal did nothing, or worse, what if it accelerated the process of vitrification that was consuming the family? But the alternative was unthinkable. To become Thaddeus's daughter-in-law, the mother of Elias's children? No. Better to act and fail than to submit without a fight. Taking a deep breath, she lit a lantern and descended the steep stairs into the cellar. The darkness below seemed thicker than before, almost tangible, as if it had substance and weight. The air was colder too, cold enough that her breath formed clouds of vapor that caught the lantern light. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, the familiar chiming reached her ears, the crystalline tears suspended from the ceiling, stirred by the slight air current from the open trapdoor. She raised her lantern, and the mobile of tears came into view, glittering in the golden light. And at its center, the heart crystal pulsed with its own inner radiance, a rhythmic glow that seemed to quicken as she approached. The crystal was larger than she remembered, about the size of her fist, and its color had deepened to a ruby red that seemed to swirl within the translucent surface like liquid. As she drew nearer, she became aware of a sound emanating from it, not the delicate chiming of the smaller tears, but a deeper resonance that she felt in her chest rather than heard with her ears. It was, she realized with a chill, exactly like the sound of a heartbeat. Setting the lantern on a nearby shelf, Abigail reached up toward the heart crystal. It hung just above her head, suspended by a thin silver wire that caught the light like a strand of spider's silk. Her fingers were inches from the pulsing crystal when a voice spoke from the darkness beyond the lantern's glow. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Abigail whirled around, nearly knocking over the lantern in her haste. Standing at the foot of the stairs was Elias Pendergast, his small form casting an elongated shadow across the earthen floor of the cellar. In the dim light, his eyes seemed to glow with the same inner radiance as the heart crystal. "Master Elias," she stammered, dropping her hand to her side. "I was just trying to destroy our family's legacy," the boy finished for her, his voice as cold and clear as the crystals hanging above them. "Did you really think it would be so easy, that we wouldn't be watching you?" He took a step forward, and in the shifting lantern light, Abigail saw that something was wrong with his face. The skin around his eyes and mouth seemed too tight, too smooth, as if it had been stretched over a frame, and his movements were stiff, mechanical, lacking the natural fluidity of a child's gestures. "You don't understand what's happening to your family," Abigail said, backing away until she felt the wall behind her. "The crystallization, it's killing your mother. It will kill you too, eventually." Elias tilted his head at an unnatural angle, like a curious bird. "Kill us? No, Abigail. It's perfecting us, freeing us from the weakness of flesh and emotion. I was born with a heart of glass, did you know that? Father says I'm the culmination of generations of Pendergasts, the fulfillment of our family's destiny." He took another step closer, and now Abigail could see that his skin had a faint translucent quality, like fine porcelain held up to light. "I don't feel things the way others do. I observe, I analyze, I understand without the interference of emotion. It's quite liberating." "It's monstrous," Abigail whispered. Elias's lips curved in what might have been a smile on a normal child's face, but on his, it was merely a mechanical arrangement of features. Monstrous? Perhaps. But monsters often survive when others perish. The glass heart is eternal, Abigail. It doesn't age. It doesn't weaken. It simply exists, perfect and unchanging, forever. And what happens when the rest of you turns to glass? When there's nothing left of the boy you were? For a moment, something flickered in Elias's eyes. A shadow of doubt, or perhaps fear. But it was gone so quickly that Abigail couldn't be sure she'd seen it at all. "That's why we need you," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're different, special. Father says your bloodline carries an immunity to the complete transformation. Your children, our children, will have glass hearts but flesh bodies. The perfect balance." Revulsion washed over Abigail in a wave. "I will never marry you, Elias. I'll die first." The boy's face remained impassive. "Marriage? How quaint. No, Abigail. What Father has planned for you is far more efficient. But that's a discussion for another time." His gaze shifted to something behind her. "Isn't it, Father?" Before Abigail could turn, strong hands gripped her shoulders, spinning her around to face Thaddeus Pendergast. His face, inches from hers, was a mask of cold fury. "I'm deeply disappointed in you, Abigail," he said, his breath misting in the cellar's chill air. "After our conversation, I had hoped you understood the honor being bestowed upon you. Instead, you attempt to destroy that which has elevated our family above common humanity for generations." His grip tightened painfully on her shoulders. "I see now that you require more direct persuasion. The ceremony cannot wait until Elias reaches maturity, as I had planned. The risk is too great. We will proceed tonight." "Ceremony?" Abigail's voice was barely audible. "What ceremony?" Thaddeus's smile was terrible to behold, a splitting of lips that revealed teeth too white and too perfect to be natural. "The binding, of course. The same ceremony that joined Eleanor to our family's legacy. The same that has been performed for generations of Pendergast brides." He glanced at the heart crystal pulsing above them. "A small piece of the original heart will be placed inside you, where it will grow and eventually join with your own heart, not transforming it, but binding it to ours. Your children will be born with the glass heart intact, but your flesh will remain mostly unchanged." "Mostly?" Abigail tried to pull away, but his grip was immovable. "There are side effects. A certain stiffening of the joints, occasional crystalline tears, a gradual dulling of extreme emotions. But these are small prices to pay for the honor of advancing our family's evolution." With surprising strength, he began to drag her toward the far wall of the cellar, where a heavy wooden door had materialized, or perhaps had always been there, hidden in shadow. Elias followed, his movements as fluid as a snake's, despite the unnatural stiffness Abigail had observed earlier. The door opened onto a narrow staircase that descended even deeper into the earth. The steps were worn smooth in the center, as if generations of feet had traversed them. The air growing colder with each step down, carrying a strange mineral scent that reminded Abigail of the limestone caves she'd once visited with her mother as a child. At the bottom of the stairs, a circular chamber opened before them, its walls lined with blue-veined marble that seemed to glow with its own pale luminescence. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, its surface carved with symbols that hurt Abigail's eyes to look at directly. Upon the altar lay an array of silver instruments, slender knives, delicate forceps, a crystal bowl filled with a liquid that shimmered like quicksilver but moved with the viscosity of honey. Most disturbing of all were the walls themselves. Upon closer inspection, Abigail realized that what she'd taken for veins in the marble were actually crystalline tears embedded within the stone, thousands of them, of all sizes and colors, glittering in the strange light that seemed to emanate from the rock itself. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Thaddeus murmured, his eyes reflecting the unearthly glow. "This chamber has existed since Jeremiah Pendergast first built the manor in 1742. The walls are lined with the tears of every Pendergast who has undergone the transformation. They serve as witnesses to the ceremony." He guided, or rather forced, Abigail to the altar, where Elias was already arranging the silver implements with the precision of a surgeon. "My son will assist me," Thaddeus explained, as if discussing a mundane household task. "He has shown remarkable aptitude for the ritual despite his youth, another sign of his unique nature." Panic rose in Abigail's throat as Thaddeus pressed her back against the cold stone of the altar. "Please," she gasped, "you don't have to do this. Whatever curse afflicts your family, there must be another way to end it." Something flickered in Thaddeus's glass-like eyes, a momentary softening perhaps, or a shadow of the human he had once been. "It's not a curse, Abigail. It's an evolution, a transcendence of the weak flesh that binds lesser beings to a cycle of emotion, suffering, and death. The glass heart feels no pain, harbors no fear, succumbs to no disease. It is eternal and empty," came a voice from the stairway. "The glass heart is empty, Thaddeus, a perfect void where a soul should be." All three turned to see Eleanor Pendergast standing at the foot of the stairs, or rather, a version of Eleanor, for the woman who stood before them bore only a passing resemblance to the mistress of Pendergast Manor. Her skin had the transparent quality of fine crystal, through which the blue tracery of veins was clearly visible. Her hair, once auburn, had transformed into strands that resembled spun glass, catching the light with every slight movement, and her eyes, those amber eyes that had passed to her daughters, were now completely crystalline, reflecting the chamber in perfect, miniature detail. "Eleanor," Thaddeus's voice held surprise, but no warmth. "You should be in bed. The transformation is nearly complete. Moving about will only accelerate the process." "The process is already complete, husband." Eleanor's voice had the resonant quality of crystal struck by a silver spoon, musical but inhuman. "My heart is glass. My tears are crystal. My blood runs slow as honey in my veins. Soon, I will shatter into 1,000 perfect pieces, and you will add my fragments to your collection." Her gaze, eerily reflective, turned to Abigail. "But I will not allow you to condemn another young woman to my fate." With a movement faster than Abigail's eye could track, Eleanor was suddenly at the altar, her glass-like hand closing around one of the silver knives. Before Thaddeus could react, she had pressed the blade against his throat. "Step away from the girl, Thaddeus." The knife trembled against his skin, drawing a thin line of blood that beaded but didn't flow. Blood too thick, too crystallized to obey the normal laws of human physiology. For a moment, no one moved. Then Elias, his child's face devoid of expression, picked up another of the knives and pointed it at his mother. "Put it down, mother," he said, his voice flat as a frozen pond. "You know you can't harm father. The binding won't allow it. Your hand will shatter before the knife draws blood." Eleanor's crystalline face was incapable of showing emotion, but her voice carried a weight of sorrow that filled the chamber. "My son, my beautiful hollow son, what have we done to you?" "You've perfected me," Elias replied. "Isn't that what you always wanted? A child who would never disappoint you, never disobey, never feel the messy emotions that complicated your own life? Well, here I am, the pinnacle of the Pendergast legacy, a heart of glass in a child's body." "No," Eleanor whispered, the word ringing like a cracked bell. What I wanted was a son who could feel love, joy, sadness, all the things that make us human, the things I can scarcely remember now. She turned her gaze back to Thaddeus, who stood motionless under the knife at his throat. Do you remember love, Thaddeus? Do you remember how it felt when we first met, when the twins were born? Or has the glass in your heart frozen even those memories? Something like pain crossed Thaddeus's face, the first genuine emotion Abigail had ever seen him display. I remember echoes, shadows, like looking at a painting of a sunset instead of experiencing the real thing. His voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes I miss it, the feeling, the warmth, but then the glass grows colder and the memory fades. It doesn't have to be this way, Eleanor said, lowering the knife slightly. We can end it, here, now. Break the heart crystal and free our family from this curse. Thaddeus shook his head, the movement stiff and mechanical. It's too late for us, Eleanor. The transformation is too far advanced. If the heart crystal is destroyed, we will shatter with it. All of us. You, me, the children, even Elias, born of glass though he is. Then so be it, Eleanor replied, her crystalline features catching the strange light of the chamber. Better to end as humans than continue as monsters. With a sudden movement, she spun away from Thaddeus and lunged toward the staircase, her intentions clear. She meant to ascend to the cellar and destroy the heart crystal hanging there. Thaddeus was after her in an instant, moving with a speed that belied his stiff-jointed condition. He caught her at the foot of the stairs, his hands closing around her wrists. There was a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake, and Eleanor gasped, a sharp, brittle intake of breath. Your arm, Thaddeus said, his voice hollow with shock. Eleanor, your arm. Abigail, momentarily forgotten in the commotion, saw that Eleanor's left arm had fractured at the wrist, a perfect crack running through the crystalline flesh. A drop of thick, viscous blood seeped from the fracture, hardening instantly into a red tear that fell to the stone floor with a musical clink. It doesn't matter, Eleanor said, her voice fainter now, resonating at a higher pitch. Nothing matters except ending this. For the children, Thaddeus. For what's left of their humanity. Something shifted in Thaddeus's expression, a softening, a momentary clarity, as if he were seeing his wife clearly for the first time in years. Eleanor. The moment was shattered by Elias, who darted between them with the unnatural quickness he had inherited from his transformed parents. The knife he held flashed in the chamber's ghostly light. No, Abigail cried, lunging forward, but she was too late. The blade struck not Eleanor, as Abigail had feared, but Thaddeus, plunging into his chest with a sound like a diamond cutting glass. Thaddeus staggered backward, looking down at the silver hilt protruding from his sternum with an expression of mild surprise rather than pain. Elias, he murmured, his voice fading like a distant wind chime. Son, you were going to destroy it, Elias said, his childish face still eerily devoid of expression. I could see it in your eyes, a moment of weakness, humanity reasserting itself. He yanked the knife free, and instead of blood, a shower of tiny crystal fragments spilled from the wound, tinkling against the stone floor. Unacceptable. The legacy must continue. The evolution must proceed. Thaddeus sank to his knees, crystal shards continuing to fall from the wound in his chest. His skin was becoming more transparent by the second, the transformation accelerating as his life force ebbed. My son, he whispered, reaching for Elias with a hand that was rapidly crystallizing before their eyes. What have I done to you? Elias stepped back, avoiding his father's touch. You've made me perfect, he replied. And now, with your sacrifice, I will lead our family into the next phase of evolution. He turned to face Abigail and Eleanor, the bloody knife still clutched in his small hand. The heart crystal will receive a powerful infusion tonight, the fully transformed heart of a Pendergast patriarch. And then, Abigail, we will proceed with the binding. You will be the mother of the next generation, children even more perfect than I. No. Eleanor moved to stand between her son and Abigail, her fractured arm hanging useless at her side. I won't allow it. This ends tonight. Elias regarded his mother with cold calculation. You can't stop me. You're already more glass than flesh. One blow and you'll shatter like a dropped teacup. Perhaps, Eleanor agreed, her voice tinkling like crystal wind chimes. But I don't need to defeat you, Elias. I only need to delay you. Before anyone could react, she had turned and pushed Abigail toward the stairs. Run, she commanded. Destroy the heart crystal. It's the only way to end this madness. Abigail didn't hesitate. She bolted up the stairs, hearing the inhuman shriek of rage from Elias behind her, followed by a sound she would never forget, the shattering of crystal, like 1,000 wine glasses being crushed underfoot all at once. Eleanor had given her life to provide this chance. Abigail would not waste it. She emerged into the root cellar, gasping for breath, the crystalline mobile tinkling softly above her in the disturbed air. In the center, the heart crystal pulsed with a light that seemed brighter, more frantic than before, as if it sensed the danger approaching. Behind her, she could hear the rapid patter of Elias's feet ascending the stairs. The boy moved with unnatural speed, but the staircase was long, and she had a head start. Frantically, Abigail cast about for something to use as a weapon. Her gaze fell upon a cast-iron cooking pot stored on a nearby shelf. Heavy, solid. It would have to do. Grabbing the pot, she climbed onto a barrel beneath the hanging mobile. The heart crystal pulsed just above her head, its ruby glow reflecting in her wide eyes. It seemed to be beating faster now, as if in fear. The soft chiming of the surrounding teardrops grew more agitated as Elias reached the top of the hidden staircase, his small form silhouetted against the darker shadows of the chamber beyond. "Stop!" he cried, his voice higher and sharper than Abigail had ever heard it. A child's voice, tinged with something that might have been fear. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," Abigail replied, raising the iron pot above her head. "I'm ending a curse that has destroyed your family for generations." "It's not a curse," Elias insisted, approaching slowly, his hands outstretched in a placating gesture. "It's a gift. Immunity from emotion, from pain, from death itself. The glass heart is eternal, Abigail." "And empty," she echoed Eleanor's words. "A perfect void where a soul should be." With all her strength, Abigail brought the iron pot crashing down on the heart crystal. There was a moment of resistance, like striking a block of ice, and then a sound that seemed to contain all the shattered hopes and frozen tears of generations of Pendergasts. A high, keening note that rose in pitch until it was almost beyond human hearing, and then silence. The heart crystal exploded into thousands of razor-sharp fragments that rained down upon the cellar floor like deadly hail. Abigail threw up her arms to shield her face, feeling the sting of crystal shards against her exposed skin. A scream tore through the silence. Elias, his small body convulsing as if struck by lightning. Before Abigail's horrified gaze, cracks began to appear in his porcelain skin, spreading like frost across a window pane in winter. Light shone through the fractures, not blood, but pure white radiance that spilled from within him like a shattered lantern. "Father," the boy gasped, reaching toward the hidden staircase with fingers that were already crumbling to crystal dust. "Mother, help me." Then, with a sound like a crystal goblet dropped on marble, Elias Pendergast shattered, his glass heart finally, fatally fracturing within his hollow chest. What remained was not blood and bone, but a pile of glittering crystal dust that caught the lantern light like freshly fallen snow. Abigail stood frozen in horror, the iron pot still clutched in her trembling hands. Had she truly done this? Destroyed a child, monstrous though he might have been? As if in answer to her unspoken question, the crystal dust that had been Elias began to shift and change. The glittering particles rose into the air, swirling like a miniature tornado. Within the vortex, Abigail glimpsed faces. Thaddeus, Eleanor, Elias, the twins, and others she didn't recognize. Generations of Pendergasts, their features formed of crystal dust for just an instant before dissolving back into the whirling mass. The vortex expanded, filling the cellar with a wind that shouldn't have been possible in the enclosed space. It plucked at Abigail's hair and clothes, but strangely didn't disturb the lantern's flame. The crystalline tears that had hung from the ceiling were caught up in the maelstrom, adding their mass to the swirling cloud. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon ceased. The crystal dust fell to the cellar floor in a perfect circle, glittering one last time in the lantern light before turning to ordinary gray ash. In the sudden stillness, Abigail became aware of sounds from above, voices calling out in confusion, footsteps hurrying toward the kitchen. The twins, she realized. They must have heard the commotion. She ascended the cellar stairs on legs that threatened to buckle beneath her, emerging into the kitchen just as Lucinda and Cecilia burst through the door from the dining room. "Abigail!" Cecilia cried, her face pale with shock. "What happened?" "We heard a terrible noise, and then..." She broke off, pressing a hand to her chest with a gasp of surprise. Lucinda mirrored her twin's gesture, amber eyes wide. "It's gone," she whispered. "The coldness in my chest. The glass. It's gone." The twins stared at each other, then at Abigail, comprehension dawning slowly on their identical faces. "You destroyed it," Lucinda said. Not a question, but a statement. "The heart crystal. You broke our family's curse." "But father," Cecilia's voice quavered. "Mother? Elias?" Abigail could only shake her head, tears welling in her eyes. Ordinary human tears that splashed onto the kitchen floor without crystallizing. "I'm sorry. They were too far gone." When the heart crystal shattered, she couldn't continue, but she didn't need to. The twins understood. Cecilia began to weep softly, while Lucinda's face hardened with a resolve far beyond her 15 years. "We should be grateful," Lucinda said, placing an arm around her sister's shaking shoulders. "They're free now, and so are we." In the days that followed, a story was constructed for public consumption. A tragic fire in the previously unknown chamber beneath the house, claiming the lives of Thaddeus, Eleanor, and Elias Pendergast. The twins, now orphans, were placed under the guardianship of a distant cousin summoned from Charleston. Abigail remained with them as lady's maid, her role in the events of that night a secret shared only among the three of them. Pendergast Manor was sold, the proceeds placed in trust for the twins until they came of age. The new owners, a merchant family from Savannah, reported no strange occurrences, no crystalline tears appearing mysteriously in the night. Whatever curse or gift had afflicted the Pendergast line was well and truly broken. Years later, when Lucinda and Cecilia had grown into beautiful young women with no trace of their family's strange legacy, Abigail would sometimes awaken from dreams in which she heard the delicate chiming of crystal tears. On those nights, she would light a candle and check on the small wooden box she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her room. A box containing a single, perfectly formed crystal teardrop that she had found on the cellar floor the day after the heart crystal shattered. It was clear as the finest diamond, catching the candlelight in facets that seemed to hold memories within them, not just of the tragic Pendergast family, but of something older, something that had come from a distant island, where emotions solidified into eternal glass. A reminder of how close humanity stands to the abyss of perfection without compassion, of existence without feeling. The tear never grew or changed, and Abigail never shed a crystalline tear of her own. But sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, she would hold the teardrop up to the candlelight and watch as something seemed to pulse within its depths, something like a heartbeat, growing ever fainter with each passing year, until eventually it faded entirely, leaving only ordinary glass behind. Some say that on certain nights when the moon is full and the Spanish moss sways gently in the Carolina breeze, visitors to the old Pendergast property report hearing a sound like tiny bells chiming in the darkness, and occasionally a lucky, or perhaps unlucky, soul might discover a small, perfect teardrop of crystal nestled among the fallen leaves, cool to the touch, and faintly pulsing with an inner light that seems to whisper of tears that never fall, emotions that never fade, and hearts that beat for eternity within perfect prisons of glass.